into a democratic revolution. The world did not join together.
What the fuck? Yo! Wait. Dude, why can't this be treated like with the same level of disrespect that like QAnoners are treated with?
The US government is quietly reshaping the global economy in ways that will change our world forever. You can see this in just one sentence from Joe Biden's first address to Congress.
Think about it. There is simply no reason why the blades for wind turbines can't be built in Pittsburgh instead of Beijing. No reason. No reason. None.
This seems just like a boring political statement, but I promise this statement is a bigger deal than it seems, because it marks a new era in our global system, a system that all of us participate in, whether we know it or not. Or maybe it's a rerun of an economic system that the globe turned to right before the Second World War.
There's no reason why American workers can't lead the world in the production of electric vehicles and batteries. I mean, there is no reason. We have the capacity.
In this video, I want to peek under the hood of the endlessly complex and fascinating global economy to show you just how deeply connected we've all become and how those connections are being cut and weaponized. All of this thanks to new threats, new risks, new realizations.
I don't get it. Like, is this like a unequal exchange in global trade, which has been tremendously beneficial to the Western world, is actually bad because it ends up fucking developing our enemies? Is this literally one of those? Like, this can't be, right? I mean, this is the most reactionary fucking, this is the most reactionary video you can make. Like, this is like neocon shit, you know what I mean? This is Donald Trump. Like, this is beyond neocon shit. This is a deviation that Donald Trump had with the rest of the regular villains in American society. It's not even neocon. Yeah, it's just like, this is the reason why the fucking Steele guy left the Trump administration. What was his name? Is this Trump's NAFTA bad take? No, it's beyond that. No. I'm not even talking about that. I'm talking about China's, Donald Trump's like tariffs on China were actually incredibly unpopular. Not Christopher Steele. No, not Rex Tillerson. No, not the Steele dossier. The fucking guy. What's his name? He was he's like the billionaire who was in Donald Trump's cabinet, and then he was like, no, fuck that. No, I said the Steele guy. Is he like, he owns a bunch of... Okay, never mind. Carl Icahn. Thank you. That's who I was thinking of. I think it was Carl Icahn, right? Carl Icahn resigned from Trump advisor role ahead of article alleging conflict of interest. But the reason why he said he was leaving was because of what do you call it? Trump's tariffs potentially. And ironically, that was something that people considered to be really unacceptable, even his key allies at the time, because of how it hurt trade in general. So it's surprising that Johnny Harris is taking that same position here, it seems, but maybe I'm wrong. We'll see.
New values, and above all, a new rivalry between two great powers. This is the world that we are moving into. It's how things will work for decades to come, and it's important that we understand it. So let me give you an overview of what is becoming the new global economy.
The new tariffs from both sides went into effect earlier this morning.
The U.S. tariffs have kicked in. China can't put as many tariffs on us as we can put on them.
China is still the biggest threat to the United States.
Folks, we need to make these chips right here in America.
Hey, so for a long time, I've been at war with marketers, people who call my phone even though I don't want them to, and who send me emails even though I never gave them my email address. We're all familiar with this. It's called spam, and it is increasingly a problem.
This is an
But
ad,
then
right?
I recently learned that I actually phone is you immediately get put back on, and Incogni constantly monitors month after month to make sure that you stay off these lists. So yeah, big discount. Click the link in my description, use the code, and you'll get the big discount. You can try it out and see if it clears your life of spam and makes you feel like you have a little more privacy in your life. Let's dive into this story. It's a big one, it's an important one, and I'm excited to share it with you. The economy that we live in, that we all take for granted, is actually relatively new. The clothes
It's an ethical react. I still showed the ad.
that you're wearing right now, the computer or the phone that you're looking at to watch this video, the materials that your house is made out of, the fibers in the blanket that you use at night, the food you eat, all of it is a product of perhaps one of the most significant achievements of our species, global trade. Early on, humans discovered the magic that occurs when a group of people specialize in producing something valuable, like grain. They make more than they need, and then they take that excess and they give it to another group who also made too much of something because they specialize in a specific thing, maybe textiles. And through this exchange, both parties benefit way more than they could on their own. It was this kind of cooperation that leveled our species up beyond any other animal on Earth. So we just kept doing it.
No, I'm not going to watch Miko Peled. Which, by the way, ironically, you said 3:30 p.m. Eastern time, which means that it already happened. Maybe later. 3:30 p.m. Eastern time happened already. Please stop asking me to watch Piers Morgan. I know Miko Peled is great, okay? I know. I'm not going to watch him right now.
In fact, the history of our human civilization is largely the history of people trading on an ever-growing scale. Today, this is normal. We call it the economy. By the time the 1900s rolled around, we had a pretty connected world. There was global trade all over the place. But it was still pretty clunky. Everyone had different trade rules, different currencies. Countries were worried that foreign products would threaten their domestic producers, so they put up trade barriers and imposed big tariffs on stuff coming into their country. Then 70 years ago came that war that almost tore this world apart. Out of the ashes of that war, the US emerged as the most powerful country ever. It had troops and influence in every corner of the globe.
Just magically that happened. That was cool when that Sanjay was on and say, yeah, I don't care, man. Please stop trying to get me to fucking watch Piers Morgan videos. I'm sick and tired of watching Piers Morgan videos, man. Oh my God. I'm trying to do Hogwatch, man. I'm trying to do some fun shit. Okay, I'm trying to cover some other types of news.
And with that new power, the US and its allies wrote a new playbook for the world economy. They would make it so that the US dollar was the top currency. Everything would kind of be pegged to the US dollar. This helped stabilize the whole system. It helped it move more predictably. It helped countries send and receive money across borders. The US also got countries together with the goal of lowering the taxes imposed on products flowing in and out of their country, tariffs. And through all these efforts, all these new rules, borders opened up. Investors could put their money almost anywhere on Earth to grow new businesses. Corporations could look to faraway lands for cheaper workers to set up their factories. The world became one big market, and it started to benefit hundreds of millions of people. So much so that even anti-capitalist China couldn't stay out of this global economy that was so unrecognizably open, that was so much more open than anything the world had ever seen. There was way too much money to be made. So China jumped in. They said that they would remain communist, but they would open up a few dozen of their coastal cities to be open for business in this new global market. Millions of China's rural poor flocked to the coastal cities, these gateways to the global market. They showed up ready to work, and to work for cheap. A world away over in the United States, corporations looked at all of their factories in places like Detroit and Buffalo and realized that it would make a lot more sense for them to move all of these factories to China, where they could pay workers a fraction of the wage. And spoiler alert, all these coastal cities in China that opened up to the global economy soon looked like this. Hundreds of millions of people in China.
Dude, it's so sick that capitalists invented what we understand is trade. It was fire. I love capitalism. Inventor of trade, inventor of commerce, inventor of just making things, you know? Fucking sick. Inventor of money. Inventor of iPhone. Capitalism invented tall buildings, dipshit. Are you not learning anything from Johnny? I mean, this is a pretty basic video. This is like the most basic ass, most reductive ass way of approaching the subject matter. Everybody loved trading after World War II, and America simply was the major beneficiary, or the guy that was, dishing out these partnerships, and everyone was doing it on the dollar. Also, they just happened to have a bunch of military bases everywhere, and they created security partnerships as well. Also, the USSR did not exist at the time, famously. It did not. It was not a thing that existed. We don't need to talk about the USSR. We're talking about China. Even though, of course, like a big chunk of the reason why America was doing all of these things that it was doing was to also position itself against the USSR. And yeah. But then China was like, damn, we love money, dog. Fuck, that shit seems dope. Can you give us capitalism? Like, don't worry, we'll still be socialist, but also we'll do a little bit of capitalism, which is when you develop, when you make factories and develop commodities. That's called capitalism. So then they did that. It's kind of funny because it's like the China part of this conversation is not dissimilar to how my haters approach the subject matter, and those guys are fucking idiots. They're not Johnny motherfucking Harris, you know what I mean? Which is like, capitalism, you claim to be an anti-capitalist, yet you're making t-shirts. Oh, fucking got him! Imagine selling t-shirts while hating capitalism, oh my god. And it's like, dude, that's not antithetical at all. The entire point of that is to make sure that the workers that are making the fucking t-shirts are getting an honest pay, having more autonomy over their own fucking lives and in their workplaces. Like, nobody said that's not allowed, you know? Yeah, this also totally acts like U.S. commerce was just what lifted everyone in China out of poverty, and now the government's control and distribution of capital gains coming into the country. That part is also funny. The other part of it is that, like, businesses just kind of up and left.
China jumped in. They said that they would remain communist, but they would open up a few dozen of their coastal cities to be open for business in this new global market. Millions of China's rural poor flocked to the coastal cities, these gateways to the global market. They showed up ready to work. And to work.
At least it's not saying that like China did this at gunpoint, you know what I mean? Which is, I feel like, what I'm expecting usually from people that, cover this kind of thing.
For cheap. A world away over in the United States, corporations looked at all of their factories in places like Detroit and Buffalo and realized that it would make a lot more sense for them to move all of these factories to China, where they could pay workers a fraction of the wage. And spoiler alert, all these coastal cities in China that opened up to the global economy soon looked like this. Hundreds of millions of people in China lifted out of poverty and thrust into this new middle and upper class, all thanks to the magic of the global economy, based on the rules and policies that the US had set up after World War II. It was so good for China and a bunch of other countries, but for the many Americans whose jobs had just been given to someone in like Shanghai, this didn't feel like magic. It felt like betrayal, like a recipe for poverty and ghost towns. This China shock was one of the first big tastes of the economic pain that this global economy could inflict on huge numbers of people. But to everyone else, it was totally worth it, because thanks to this system, people were suddenly seeing prices at their stores drop further.
Yeah, it's just weird because, like, China is not the only country that has participated in global trade after, I don't know, withstanding colonial powers, eviscerating it, getting fucking genocided during World War II. It's not the only country that got in on the whole, like, no, we can manufacture stuff for you shtick. It's just like they, however, did have one thing that's just different than everybody else, and that was, I don't know, it was a temerity, was it grit, or maybe it was higher degrees of socialization and a long-term sustainable plan to develop the nation state through a centrally planned economy. Because when you look at China and you look at every other country, it's like they had similar circumstances. No country is obviously the same, of course, when it comes to natural resources, when it comes to fucking the death and destruction that they withstood during times of conflict or colonial violence they were subjected to. And yet China had all of that shit. They did. But then they still were able to develop in a way that became a fucking behemoth in comparison to many of these other countries that did not get that same level of treatment. One of the major reasons is because, for one reason or another, China did not get coup d'etat or did not get destroyed when to make decisions with respect to loans that were being used towards improving their productive forces. That is the truth. Okay? There are differences with respect to what has happened in China when it was improving its and developing its productive forces versus other countries. One school of thought is that it is it was allowed partially because it was seen as like a partner at which times America could cooperate with against the USSR. So I think that might have played a role in it. But overall, I think that the reason for why China developed in a way that India did not, obviously there's a bunch of different reasons, but one reason is because of the consistent centralized planning and even development strategies that were implemented over and over and over again, and very successfully so. During the 90s, neoliberal dominance in South America, we got massive foreign investments and even saw GDP growth, but hunger and poverty were still the same as the 30s, basically. The people who think that China just adopted capitalism and just became this behemoth of production just shows that they've never studied the history of the USSR. Lenin's NEP was no different than what China is doing today, and it is a legitimate and valid method of preparing the productive force of a country to transition to socialism. China is just way more populated and needs to improve on that aspect much before their transition. I mean, who knows? We'll see.
Than seemed possible. Washing machines, shoes, tools, toasters, couches, shirts, socks, toys, mattresses, lawn chairs, anything you can think of is now flowing from Chinese factories and available for dirt cheap at your local Walmart, all while transforming the lives of people in places like Vietnam, India, Chile, and Thailand, who saw huge economic growth during these years. So by the 80s, China's fully in the global economy, and it is a
like, there is no, okay, what the fuck? There you go. Okay. Vietnam, Chile. It's like, why didn't any of these other countries get the same level of development? And also, Vietnam versus Chile is actually another interesting one, too, when you compare it. It's just like, Vietnam has done fairly well, all things considered, but that's why it's good to compare it to a place like Chile, where it was and where it is now. Stagnation versus continued development and genuine prosperity. It's good. It's good to make these comparisons, and it always feels like it is because these places were able to implement initiatives that we fucking fawn over when white countries do it, and I'm sick and tired of acting like that's not the fucking case. Okay? That's why it's like Bernie bros love Norway and fucking Sweden or whatever, but like they can't comprehend it when it's a fucking Asian country doing the same shit. The difference, of course, obviously, is that one was a beneficiary of colonial violence, the other usually a recipient. Okay? So it's even more impressive that they're able to implement genuine socialization and genuine centralized planning that benefits broad swaths of the fucking population. Everybody gets horny as fuck for Germany. All of the fucking sockdems on Twitter literally nut when talking about how beautiful EU countries are. But when you fucking turn around and talk about China, they're like, whoa, dude, chill. That's like the worst country you could point to, my man. Whoa, dude, what the fuck? China had no colonial violence? What do you mean? Like, as far as China's colonial violence goes, we're talking about its development. Chinese development was stunted by being victims of colonial violence. You're doing it already. You're doing the thing. Yeah, Japan only exterminated 40 million Chinese, like the rapes and the Nazi style, which, by the way, ironically, Nazi aligned, and also at the same time the Nazis were doing this, Nazi style experimentation on the Chinese. Ironically, of course, back then we were kind of aligned, us in America, with China. Had a pretty solid spy apparatus that we utilized. Things could have been very different. Anyway.
Gravy trade. The US and UK both elect leaders who love this free trade global capitalism.
More trade, not less, is the wave of the future.
The new system was boosted by all of this new technology that was coming out, making it easier to pass information across borders, to move money, to move people, to move goods across the globe. A globe that used to be vast and daunting and closed, but now just looked like a giant marketplace. All of this transforming in a matter of decades. But I need to call something out that is very important and that is maybe not obvious at this point, which is that the seemingly magical process that made the world economy do this wasn't actually thanks to technology. It was the most amazing invention, most amazing technology. Policy. Words on a page that establish rules that countries and people promise to obey. If we all believe and obey these rules, it creates the conditions that made the world into a giant marketplace where a corporation could source whatever they needed to make their...
Yeah, I think that's crazy. Unless he means like policy for the Western world, right? He must not mean like the global South. There is 0% chance he's talking about the global South, because gains made by GDP for Western nations and those within the imperial core is dramatic and oftentimes done at the cost of a lack of development in the global South. Because as long as they are not developed, they are much easier. As long as they're not developed, they're easier to privatize. Privatization implies better mechanisms of extraction that will then take the wealth and bring it back into Western nations in the global North, and then beyond that, we're not even just talking about the mineral wealth, but also the labor force that is easily exploitable. It means trade policy that lets us deindustrialize and move it to the global South. Yeah. Trade, or the way that we have done trade in like the neoliberal world has been very beneficial for America and its allies in the global North, in the EU, and other, I guess, like Marshall Plan recipient nations not necessarily been that beneficial for all of the other countries whose mineral wealth and natural resources were robbed, whose productive forces were, I guess its productive forces were uplifted, but oftentimes at great cost.
On a page that establish rules that countries and people promise to obey. If we all believe and obey these rules, it creates the conditions that made the world into a giant marketplace where a corporation could source whatever they needed to make their product from anywhere in the world, whatever made the most economic sense. Soon, products as simple as a t-shirt would travel along an unfathomably complex supply chain using material and labor from many countries all around the globe before eventually showing up conveniently just in time at the store. Policy had created mass cooperation between billions of people who don't speak the same language, who don't know each other, but are somehow all getting in on the same market. This mental construct of economic policy is what created globalization, the globalization we know today. And what's crazy to me is that if you tinker with the policy, if you mess with this, you can reverse a lot of this globalization, which is exactly what's happening right now.
There is simply no reason why the blades for wind turbines can't be built in Pittsburgh instead of Beijing.
Okay, but let's stick to our timeline here. We're kind of in the 90s. And I'll tell you, people in the 90s would have never guessed what direction this story is about to go. The Soviet Union had just fallen. Free trade and global capitalism had unambiguously beat communism, and the magic of the free market was seen as the solution for pretty much everything.
Free trade had beat communism? I'm gonna die. I am going to die a million deaths. Now remember, this man is a liberal. This is why Stalin wasn't right on a lot of stuff, except for, killing a fuckload of Nazis and saying that social democrats are social fascists, okay? What the fuck? You are literally pointing to actual fucking fascist governments as a goddamn liberal 30 years later and going, remember when they actually kind of only did free trade and that's how the USSR perished? He's not even a sock them. I guess that's true, but it's like crazy to me to look at all of this and just cast it with the most rose-tinted to look at it with the most rose-tinted glasses, to cast it with the broadest brush, to make it seem as though it is simply a consequence. Like, we did trade, okay, which is capitalism. The USSR can't do trade, no trade, because that's communism. And that's how trade won, really. This is how we did it. Like, for example, Chile, which I used earlier on, what happened in Chile? Oh, that's right. We did trade. World Trade Center style trade. What do I mean by that? 9/11. But not the 9/11 World Trade Center that you know about. I'm talking about the first 9/11. Okay? That was another act of trade.
Free trade had just ended global conflict between these great superpowers, maybe forever. Free trade was eradicating global poverty. Free trade was pushing countries.
Yeah, no, it's so true. No, it's right. I think stuff like the allegations of forced organ harvesting from political prisoners takes away a lot of the appeal from any socialized accomplishments of the Chinese government, but it's also very difficult to separate facts from propaganda when it comes to criticism of China, so I don't know. No, not 93 9/11, the other 9/11. Yeah, trading democratically elected leaders with fascist dictatorships, which is, if you didn't want that to happen, then you shouldn't have fucking voted for a democratic socialist. You know what I mean? Like, sorry, it's going to happen to you and you're going to like it. That's a good trade for us. Also, it was really cool when trade eradicated global poverty. That was sick. That's a real thing. That happened. Yeah, that's why when you go to like a fucking, where is it? Was it in Malaysia? The sulfur mines. They are real big beneficiaries. What is the first 9/11? Don't Rose. It's the Chilean coup, is what I'm talking about. Also happens to be on 9/11. Also, Johnny Harris is wrong. It's not like you can add new protections and reindustrialize a country. When you deindustrialize, you not only lose the industry, you lose the supply chain, you lose the specialty engineers, specialty workers for the industries. USA is finding all of this now with their push for semiconductors. They have all the same issues I mentioned. Capitalism won, over communism, sore loser, Trump 2024. Yeah, this is what I mean. It's like, here is where a lib like Johnny Harris and like the dumbest fucking Republican voter align perfectly. You know? JK. Okay, never mind. This guy's just kidding.
To adopt democracy. And here's Bill Clinton, giddy about how good it's all going, predicting that free trade would bring democracy to China.
The more China
It's like, yeah, why don't you talk about Reagan, dog? You know, what's up? No George H.W. Bush, no Ronald Reagan, no Reagan. Why are you talking about just Bill Clinton? This is a pro-NAFTA video, by the way, which is wild. But like, why no mention of the other guys? Are you perhaps maybe making an argument about neoliberalism, but you want to do it from the Democratic side because you don't want to fucking tell your libtard audience that you are also basically defending Ronald Reagan, basically defending pretty much every fucking reactionary Republican president as well. Perhaps there is a real bipartisan consensus on matters such as this one, and that's the reason why you can get away with being like, I love Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton did this, and it's really cool. Because if you were to show, I don't know, if you were to show like the Republican presidents doing the same exact shit and playing their role, you would perhaps you'd perhaps allow your audience to recognize how this actually works. Argentinian chatter here just came back from watching the new president propose over 300 changes for laws and regulations of the country, mostly all leading to a more libertarian capitalist organization moving forward. Yeah, that's like, Argentina is actually such a great example of what I'm talking about, because it's like, we don't even need to massage these countries anymore. Like, the brain rot is set in so permanently that motherfuckers are doing it to their damn selves, you know?
liberalizes its economy, the more fully it will liberate the potential of its people. Their initiative, their imagination, their remarkable spirit of enterprise. And when individuals have the power not just to dream, but to realize their dreams, they will demand a greater say.
Free trade would prevent our age-old human curse, war, by so deeply entangling countries in mutually beneficial deals that it wouldn't make sense to fight. After all, free trade had turned Europe from a continent ravaged by war to this tightly knit group where everyone's holding hands and smiling together. Why wouldn't this naturally just happen to the whole globe?
Yeah, dude, that's exactly how it works. Like, you know, the trade partnership between the UK and Germany, for example, is identical to America and the motherfucking Philippines or some shit. You know? That's just how it works. Duh. I don't get it. Like, that's how it works. Yeah. What do you mean? It's just like totally mutually beneficial. Like what we do in the fucking Congo. And also what Germany and France are doing to each other.
China continued to make stuff and send it to the United States. Our dependency on them and them on us continued to grow, and that would surely prevent any conflict, right? No. It's looking like that's not how it's going to turn out. In fact, it's kind of the opposite.
The new tariffs from both sides went into effect earlier this morning. The US has imposed 10% tariffs on $200 billion worth of Chinese imports.
China is our military's most consequential strategic competitor and pacing challenge.
In a relatively sudden shift, governments around the world are undoing a lot of this globalization, this solution to all of our problems. They're rejecting it. India is paying companies to keep their production within their own borders, especially for important industries like pharmaceuticals and electronics. South Korea is giving taxpayer money to companies to produce green energy infrastructure instead of waiting for the free market to come build it.
Yeah, these guys are fucked up, dog. Wait, what? South Korea is giving companies taxpayer money
to produce green energy infrastructure instead of waiting for the free market to come build it.
What do you mean instead of waiting for a free market to come build it? South Korea was a military dictatorship, and then the military dictatorship transferred power over to fucking like 8 families. And it's still very much regulated in like, not an identical structure, but pretty much, as far as I understand it. I'm not the best, most well-versed person on South Korean economy, but it literally is insanely tightly regulated in a way that absolutely churns out positive results for capital owners. But it's still like, South Korea is the state capitalist country that people think China is. That's what it is. That's in my opinion, like, that is closer to state capitalism than China is.
Japan is paying companies to move production back to Japan and to move their supply chains away from China. Australia is using taxpayer money to encourage mining companies to establish the processing of rare earth
Insanely capitalism, most probably those companies are the same families you mentioned.
mineral
Yeah.
facilities within their borders instead of abroad. Nigeria is imposing restrictions on foreign goods that they want to see produced domestically, like rice and cement. They don't want to be reliant on other countries. And then you've got Europe. Countries are investing government money and protecting homegrown industries that have always been directed by the global economy, like energy, agriculture, and cars. The government getting involved in these markets incentivizes companies and consumers to make and sell these products in country, as opposed to looking abroad at the global market. And of course, leading out on all of this is the OG of the modern free market global economy, the United States, who is suddenly changing course from how they've been operating all the way up until like Obama. Like, Obama spent a great deal of his time trying to increase free trade, especially with Asia. Then first under Trump and now under Biden, the US is overhauling its economic policy to turn back some of this free trade. And what's crazy is that both Republicans and Democrats.
Yeah, the problem is trade protectionism is one thing, but if the benefits are not socialized, then you're fucked, and you're not going to be able to overcome the economic problems that you cultivated by implementing free trade, okay? Which was never really free trade to begin with. You didn't do free trade and then socialize the benefits of it to a degree where even like European nations have, okay? Here's the thing. American free trade is in some ways better than what like I guess France still does to this day with like the fucking African nations that it controls the currency of, right? Like, it's still technically a little bit better, not by like wide margins, but it's like less direct involvement that makes people feel like they actually signed up for it, or it's usually the corrupt government that signed up for it, whatever. Okay? But at least France, to a certain degree, even though it relies on the wealth of African countries that it fucking controls, okay, the banking system of, socializes those benefits. A lot of European countries do this. They rely on the global south for manufacturing. They do the same unequal exchange that America does, but then they, at least to a certain degree, socialize the actual benefits that they make from this unequal exchange. The United States of America doesn't. That's the most nutty part about the United States of America, is that it is so fucking hyper-capitalist that it won't even give you the fucking same social safety nets that is like afforded to every individual in the other European countries where they do the same shit, but at least socialize a little bit. So that's why I'm saying, like, trade protectionism is not going to solve this problem. What is going to solve this problem is socialism. Okay? You can do trade protectionist as like a liberal Democrat. You can do it as a right-wing populist, Trump-style Republican, you know. But ultimately, that's not going to fix the fucking problem.
seem to agree that we should do this, and fast.
There is no reason. We have the capacity.
Some of these policies include huge government spending bills like the CHIPS Act, which would allocate over $50 billion government dollars to companies that produce microchips here in the United States.
I like how Johnny Harris says Nigeria wants to rely less on the global market and on its own domestic goods is a bad thing. Yeah. So what you're saying is because of the Revolutionary War, we don't have universal health care? What? I'm not saying that, but that's an interesting way to approach the subject. Anyway.
Instead of in Asia, where the free market had pulled them to set up. This is also happening in other industries that the government has deemed vital, like critical minerals, cars, and clean energy. But they're not just giving subsidies, like it's not just government money washing down on all these industries. It's also barriers. Biden is imposing tariffs on imports, which protects domestic producers of certain industries because they no longer have to compete with the global market. They're also banning American.
Yeah, except if you don't have domestic producers, then you're just cooking.
Companies from selling certain products to China. They're increasing.
Don't we have like, this part is crazy. Don't we already have like a version of this with Japan, for example? Like with Japanese vehicles, like pickup trucks, directly due to, you know, American lobbying. That's why the Japanese pickup trucks that you see in the United States of America, like the Tacomas, are basically like Americanized. That's why you can't get the K trucks unless they're like super old, or that's why you can't get. That's why you don't have like the Japanese pickup trucks that are very different everywhere else. Yeah, Toyota Hilux is the original Nissan Skyline was banned. No, but the OG is the Toyota Hilux. Tacoma, the Toyota Tacoma is the Americanized version of the Toyota pickup trucks, the Toyota Hilux. Oh yeah, it's the chicken tax. The chicken tax is a 25% tariff on light trucks imported to the U.S. The United States imposed a tariff in 1964 in an executive order issued by President Lyndon Johnson as retaliation for European tariffs on American chicken imports. In the years since then, trade barriers have fallen, and the average U.S. tariff rate on industrial imports stands at 2% as of 2022, according to U.S. government figures. But the chicken tax still stands. The original order slapped a 25% tariff on potato starch, dextrin, and brandy, as well as light trucks. In the intervening decades, the other products were stripped out, but the tariff on the light trucks imports remains. Wonder why. Meanwhile, the American auto industry was suffering a trade crisis of its own. Imports of Volkswagen cars surged in the early 60s. Americans embraced the Beetle and its cousin Type 2 van. The situation was dire enough that U.S. automakers of the United Auto Workers Union brought the issue to the German auto imports to the presidential bargaining table. President Johnson was trying to persuade Walter Reuther, president of the United Auto Workers, not to call a strike just before the 1964 election. The president also wanted union support for his civil rights agenda. He got what he wanted in return for including light trucks in the chicken tax. Volkswagen sales of trucks and vans in the U.S. plummeted. I think it's also for homologation reasons. Imports are imports. It's not designed for sale in the U.S., and it's an import, and it's not properly homologated. There's a 25-year import ban. I could be wrong, though. No, you're right about the 25-year import ban on Toyota Hiluxes, at least, and K trucks too, I think. Lobbying the auto industry has kept the tax alive all these years. Homologation is the granting of an approval by an official authority. Homologation. 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 Fuck! Stop! My brain hurts. I'm stupid. Okay, let's get back to the gay inflation.
Increasing scrutiny on any investment that comes in from places like China. Like, this is a big shift. And the question is, what happened? How did we get from this free trade heyday that was supposed to usher in world peace to this?
Markets have been whipsawed all morning and now afternoon by this ongoing trade war with China.
The short answer is one word. The answer to all of this: protection. Here's my list of 4 protections that best explain this big shift in economic policy. First, workers, which we already kind of talked about briefly with the China shock. For all the winners of the global economy, there were lots of losers, and a lot of them were communities who found themselves out of work as their jobs.
If only when we were dealing with these kinds of trade deals, not even with respect to China, but in general, if there was like some way to ensure that workers, or at least like labor unions at the time, had a say in what like workers' protections had to be implemented that were comparable. I'm just saying that is a thing you could do, right? Because notice how the trade protections that we just talked about with the chicken tax, including light trucks, existed. That's because that was not just done at the benefit of the UAW and the auto workers, but also specifically done at the benefit or at the behest of capital owners. That's why the lobbying continued. That's why the real lobbying that occurred there was done by not just labor unions, but instead by capital owners, the real important people in this conversation. Okay? Something to consider, something to remember, because the reality is when you do these kinds of trade, when you do these kinds of free trade contracts, you can do it in a way that where you actually manage how competitive the other country is. You can just like set rules. You can set rules that ensure that the Western-backed companies or the Western companies that open up in these manufacturing facilities or take advantage of these manufacturing facilities are still making sure that the trade is beneficial for the other nation as well, and that it doesn't have to be like, you know, Chinese-style governance for it to be beneficial for the other country. You can also set standards for labor. We do it for other environmental stuff. You know what I mean? We do it for other like environmental regulation from time to time. Problem is, free trade means, you know, steal as much as you can from the poorer country.
Went to cheaper overseas locations. Now listen, economists argue as to how big of a problem this actually was, and you can read all about it in my sources. But the point is that closed factories and unemployed communities in the Rust Belt have a major psychological effect on people who fear that their jobs might just disappear, either abroad or be taken over by AI.
Remember, Johnny Harris did a fucking whole ass video talking about how Iraq was not invaded because of its state-controlled oil extraction industry. So that's just like, I mean, that's like so reductive in many ways, right? That it, like the average American knows about it, and the average American is a fucking dumbass, and even they are like, oh, we invaded Iraq for oil, right? It's true, we did. And yet Johnny Harris is like, actually, that's not the case. Even though Dick Cheney in 1994 was writing fucking letters to Congress talking about how we must privatize the Iraqi oil fields and was already planning on how to parse out the oil fields in Iraq to American corporations, which ended up suspiciously playing out in exactly the designs that the American government and the Chamber of Commerce had made years prior to actually invading Iraq. I wonder how that happened. But of course, don't think about that. It's just, there's other reasons. It's because George W. Bush was really vindictive and was upset that, you know, daddy was being embarrassed, and that's why he did it, actually. That must be the real reason why when we invaded Iraq, the only fucking ministry that we defended was the energy ministry and nowhere else. The only ministry that remained standing was literally the energy ministry. How'd that happen? I wonder why. Anyway, let's continue.
So the government is trying to calm people down by pumpers to keep jobs in America. The next big realization about the global economy, it doesn't really care much about how much carbon it pumps into our atmosphere. Our world is barreling towards a very real climate crisis, and governments realize they're gonna have to force the market to get serious about things like electric cars, solar panels, and other green infrastructure. The free market is not going to incentivize this, and if it doesn't happen, we're gonna have a much bigger problem on our hands. One of the best parts
What the fuck? Stop talking about politics, please and thank you. What should I do, Hashi Baba?
of the global economy is that our products get made by materials that are being tossed around the globe at the perfect time, at the perfect place, to all come together to be made into a final product, all to arrive at a shelf at some store so that we can purchase it. These supply chains are insane, and they cross the entire planet. And it works great until the world shut down in a global pandemic, leaving people around the world without the products that they either needed or just kind of got used to having. Again, economists argue about how big of a deal this was. A lot of them are like, no, the supply chains held up really well during COVID. But regardless of what some academic economist is saying at MIT, all of us are left with a pretty bad taste in our mouth about supply chains after COVID. The system
It's so funny to literally make a 21-minute video about how free trade is really beneficial for everybody, as a matter of fact, and then also try to hit the like populist tone at the 16-minute mark, right at the top of the hour. You know what I mean? Where there's a 3-minute ad break. It's just like you can't fucking literally write the most like pro-academic, pro-neoliberal capitalist video and then be like, yeah, but these academics are saying the supply chain, the supply chain actually held up quite well, but we know what it's really like. Am I right? You know? Yeah, that's right. The supply chain will allow you to get a $5 a month subscription or a free one in the form of a fucking Twitch Prime, where you connect your Amazon Prime account to your Twitch account, where you get one free Prime subscription a month, and use it on your favorite broadcaster. Hopefully that's me. Here's the 3-minute ad break now. That's how I delivered it to you, through the supply chain.
system feels too fragile. A lot of us feel too reliant on a fragile system of faraway global connections that could be rocked at any moment, which has led to these protectionist policies that these governments hope will bring supply chains back inside of their borders. Okay, finally, and perhaps the most important explanation in all of this, is that Bill Clinton was totally wrong. Free
So he's saying all this is just because people are too stupid to understand how awesome free trade
trade
is.
didn't incentivize China into a democratic revolution. The world did not join together in
What the fuck? Yo! Wait. Ah! Oh my God. Dude, why can't this be treated like with the same level of disrespect that like QAnoners are treated with? Why? Like why is this not as laughable? Like people love laughing at like QAnon supporters and shit, but then when someone goes, free trade is going to bring about a democratic revolution in China, it's like, I don't understand.
is that Bill Clinton was totally wrong. Free trade didn't incentivize China into a democratic revolution. The world did not join together in one big free trade.
It's just like, for me, when I look at this stuff, like all the anti-materialist analysis comes across like it's no different than someone explaining to me the plot of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles or some shit. You know what I mean? It's like, yeah, dude, Bill Clinton was honest and earnest when he said like free trade is going to fucking make China a democracy, which it isn't right now. You know what I mean? But it actually will be. And it's not because like Bill Clinton wanted to, just like every other fucking president before him, just like every other president after him, just wanted to make products cheaper so that there was a higher profit margin for American and Western capital owners. Like there's, and that the reason why he said that is because he wanted to sell it to the dummies who didn't even give a shit really and didn't care and didn't even think about it. It was just for the dummies who read the New York Times to be like, oh, that's right, this is actually a good reason. There is a good real reason for this, yeah. Yeah, I too think that, China will democratize as a consequence of the free trade. Isn't that right, honey? It's like, that's the only people that heard that. That was the message for those people. It wasn't for like some steel mill in Pittsburgh going, Hell yeah, that's the reason I love democratizing China. I know industry has left my city and now it's a ghost town, but fuck, man. China got a democracy. That's why I keep voting for the Democratic Party, baby.
Trade market, too entangled to fight with each other. In fact, quite the opposite has happened.
Relations between the world's two largest economies are at their most tense in years.
After joining the global economy, China got really rich really fast. They've kind of started to challenge the US at its own game. And now they have one.
No, this is literally the Trump. This is the Trump policy that was like too far right for other capitalist Americans who vote for the Republican Party consistently. What Johnny Harris is right now saying is literally the reason why Republicans want Ron DeSantis to be the president. Okay, they want Ron DeSantis to be the candidate. This exact thing. Trump's attitude towards China is unironically it plays a major role in the minds of capital owners in America that are otherwise very right-wing. Okay?
One of the biggest militaries on the planet, and they use that military to assert their influence around their region.
Hurry, defend China. Look, I'm sorry, man, but if you defend fucking Norway and Sweden and all these other countries, but then you look at China and you say, no, that's actually unacceptable, they're like really bad and they're villains, like you're kind of missing the point. I at least defend Norway and all these other fucking countries when it comes to their own economic governance and say America should move in that direction.
Region. They use their newfound wealth to project influence around the world by building stuff or giving loans to people. And they're kind of trying to dethrone the United States as the one.
China is authoritarian, not defendable. You're right.
Who's calling the shots.
I mean, China is authoritarian. That much is 100% true. However, its citizens seemingly like their own government better than we do, better than we like ours. China is an authoritarian government, I say, unlike the United States of America, which is not authoritarian at all and perfectly free.
Shots on the global economic order. I made a whole video about this that you can go watch if you want, but the big point here is that the US is worried about the rapid rise of their rival across the ocean. Especially when the rise of that rival is in part fueled by American technology.
Because if they speak out against their government, they go to jail. Yeah, no, that's why their metrics are objectively metrics by Western standards, like Western studies conducted in China that have no interest in making China look good or making the Chinese governors look good, have found that there is 90% support or close to 90% support for the government. And that's because everybody loves when you fucking jail people that don't say they love the government. It could be that. I'm sure that accounts, like fear accounts for a certain percentage on these arguments, right? I'm not going to discount that at all. Or there's probably another reason. And that is economic prosperity that like every Chinese person has seen in their lifetimes, leading them to legitimately believe that the government has improved their lives by massive margins, which is objectively the truth. Say one good thing about America. I love American free speech, baby. That allows me to be able to say whatever the fuck I want without being truly afraid of being jailed. You know what I mean?
Specifically, these little silicon chips, microchips, that make weapons smart, and that will be the brains that power the AI revolution. A lot of Joe Biden's protectionist policies are actually just aimed right at China, trying to stop them from using our own tech to get ahead of us. Again, I made an entire video about microchips. You can go to that. I've kind of made a video about a lot of these things. But yeah, Joe Biden is also trying to get the supply chains for these microchips out of China's neighborhood, meaning out of Taiwan, bringing them back inside our borders to places like New Albany, Ohio, nice and safe in the middle of our continent. So you're going to see a lot more moments like this, with American presidents or politicians with hard hats on speaking at construction sites.
Folks, we need to make
I
these
don't have
chips.
an issue with this. I don't have an issue with this at all. I think this is good. I think we should manufacture things in the United States of America. I do. It's just that we should also add additional safeguards on top of that to ensure that the manufacturing facilities are also working at the behest of the workers and not necessarily just capital owners.
Right here in America to bring down everyday cost and create good jobs. America's back and America's leading the way.
This last point is kind of a brutal recognition for a lot of people, including me, to be honest, that our theory that we would all be more peaceful if we were more economically entangled is kind of wrong, at least for now. In fact, these economic entanglements are looking like they might turn into tools of conflict as opposed to preventers of conflict. Like China.
Yeah, America loves free trade so much that they had to go to the Netherlands to be like, if you give China your new semiconductor processing technology, we will do things that are not necessarily favorable to you. Okay? If you do that, which is in the name of free trade, I order you to not do that. Has a policy of not covering breaking news, by the way. Who, me? Do you think that this is breaking news? The only thing breaking is your brain, I think. What the fuck? Breaking news. America's building facilities under the Brandon regime. What is the breaking part about this, and what is the news about this even? Breaking news: America good, China bad. I agree.
China has a near monopoly on a lot of the rare earth elements that we need to make a ton of very important products, including military weapons. And if push comes to shove, they could very realistically use this as leverage and cut us off in the exact same way that we cut them off microchips. I mean, this just happened. Vladimir Putin turned off the pipelines that pumped natural gas into Europe, the gas that is needed to heat the homes and run the factories, showing us that
Yeah, that definitely didn't, That's why Europe is heatless. And Europe definitely never actually figured out other ways around getting Russian gas into Europe.
Economic entanglements can actually be a weapon, and flipping this whole theory on its head. But yeah, Joe Biden is pouring money into bringing production home, and he has a lot of support from all sides of the aisle. This is like economic nationalism. The government is getting involved to undo some of what the free market did in its heyday, which was to distribute production of stuff where it made the most economic sense, not where it protected people.
Not me.
China bad, US not as bad. Why is the controversial take in this chat, Lamau? Because it's just objectively untrue. That's it. That's the reason why it's not a controversial take in this. Or that's the reason why it's a controversial take in this chat. It's ridiculous and also objectively untrue, and I will stand by that. Does not mean that like America has better civil liberties. That's insane. Yeah, it's insane to you. America has better civil liberties. America, as the hegemonic superpower, gives certain allowances to people like myself to be able to shit talk the government. Okay? But as far as like the death and destruction that the United States of America has dealt at the global level as the hegemonic power is incomprehensible in comparison to China. You get fucking mad about Hong Kong, right? And there are authoritarian elements in China taking over Hong Kong in its entirety and implementing extradition policies, right? However, this pales in comparison to like, I don't know, fucking what we've done in Hawaii, Puerto Rico being a current territory. You never compare it from like the American metric. You don't apply the same criticism that you apply to China as you do to America. And this is before we even talk about the war on terror, Okay? Many fucking coup d'etats. And for the record, China never coup a country. Also not necessarily true. China definitely also, as a regional player, engages in not destabilization or what they consider to be an act of stability. Also, I don't like China sterilizing an ethnic minority. It's not equivalent to Puerto Rico yet. No, you're just doing copium. You're looking at Xinjiang, and you're saying that the cultural genocide of the Uyghurs, which was completely unacceptable, and I do agree with, I guess, anyone that would be critical of that, you're comparing that as the most evil thing a country can do, and comparing it to possibly the Holocaust even, which would be Holocaust revisionism regardless, while simultaneously overlooking the fact that America literally did the war on terror, which, pound for pound, significantly worse for the fucking planet. Therefore, if you were to analyze what China did in Xinjiang, which was fucking unacceptable, okay, re-education camps, and claiming that they were doing it simply to deal with separatists. It was an act of collective punishment upon an entire fucking group of people. Okay, but the idea that the horrifying nature of China's cultural genocide in Xinjiang with respect to the Uyghur Muslims, okay, that they consider to be separatists, is anywhere equivalent to like what Israel, our ally, an extension of the United States, is doing in fucking Gaza is fucking wrong. The notion that also we did not I know, I like that you also mentioned China sterilizing an ethnic minority and then you said this is not equivalent to Puerto Rico. We literally did sterilize Puerto Rican women, and also we did sterilize the indigenous population. So, and we continued to do so, as a matter of fact. We had hysterectomies in ICE facilities literally like under the Trump administration. So the idea that like that did not happen in America is just simply because you're either misguided or unfamiliar with the process. We also kind of are the fathers of the eugenicist movement to begin with, and did a lot of shit that even Nazi Germany looked at and was like, that's pretty pog. I like that. I'm going to implement that in my own way, like Jim Crow laws. So, you know, America has done it's just a whole bunch of awful nonsense. Okay? Gaza is awful, and I wish Biden would have more backbone. I just dislike China's authoritarianism, and I don't like celebrating that country. Yeah, brother. The point is, the point isn't about celebrating China, or the point isn't about me dick riding China or having a boner for China. As a matter of fact, because notice how I already criticized China on the mistreatment and cultural genocide of Uyghur Muslims. Notice how I also criticized China on having authoritarian control over what kind of speech is allowed and what kind of speech is not allowed. Notice how I even talked briefly about how China does engage with regional actors in an effort to maintain stability and will fund and facilitate certain groups. These are all criticisms of China. The difference, however, is that you said, I'm dick riding China for things that I would also celebrate in Norway or other social democratic countries. And for those things, they do absolutely deserve praise. They do. In the same exact way that other social democracies in Western nations that have their own personal bloody hands, I guess, with capital extraction from African countries and whatnot, is not all that different. The only difference there is one is the scary yellow terror. The other is white people. And they're not as scary because they're just like us. And I love them, and I'm not afraid of them in the same way that I am afraid of China. That's the difference. It's just a double standard. And it's one that is like incredibly popular, and it's basically baked into the American consciousness as a consequence of China genuinely becoming a superpower in the world, one that is competitive with the United States of America in an incredibly short period of time. Just look on the other side. You were criticizing America's actions, but also praising its free speech. Exactly. I do like their trains. Have a good rest of the stream. No, what do you mean? Why are you fucking leaving when I say this? Yes, we did have eugenics and reproductive coercion in Puerto Rico. Starting in the 1950s, Puerto Rican women were coerced into sterilization and used as test subjects in developing the modern birth control pill. But like, for the record, it's just my major point of contention was with what the chatter originally said. Okay, which was China bad, U.S. not as bad. That's not true. China bad, U.S. definitely worse. Okay? There are certain aspects of Chinese governance that are good that America should also apply. And there are certain things that the Chinese government does that America does all the time that is just as bad, but probably not as bad as the way that America does it and the way that America has serialized it and turned it into a fucking machine of death and destruction. That's it. This is genuinely problematic for a lot of people for some reason. All countries do a bunch of horrifying nonsense. Every single state has, there's not a single state, I guess maybe Cuba, that is like as close to decent. Okay, but every single state has a shit ton of awful nonsense that they engage in. Okay? Anyway. You can't just compare evil and weight against each other. Yes, I can, because I did. And I do all the time, as a matter of fact. Like, for example, when I talk about Gaza and say that the treatment of Palestinians in Gaza and the treatment of Palestinians in the West Bank are genuinely worse than the treatment of black people in America and even black people during the Jim Crow South. And this is an objectively true comparison between two different atrocities. But it's true. This does not mean that black people in the Jim Crow South were fucking doing great. They certainly were not. However, having said that, they still absolutely are comparatively doing better than Palestinian people in Gaza or Palestinian people in the West Bank. And as a matter of fact, I've said time and time again that if the conditions in the Israeli apartheid regime turned into the Jim Crow South, which is not dissimilar to the way that Palestinian citizens of Israel are treated right now, maybe a little bit better than Jim Crow South, I would say, for the Palestinian citizens of Israel, with the exception of like being able to purchase land where there are Jews in Jewish neighborhoods. That's not allowed. But beyond that, there are, some better amenities, I guess. For example, you have Arabs in positions of power every now and then symbolically. But my point is, if all Palestinians under the Israeli occupation were treated like the Palestinian citizens of Israel or treated like black people were in the Jim Crow South, this would be considered a genuine improvement on their lives. It's something I've talked about quite a bit. That's it. Anyway.
We will invent it in America and make it in America. And we're going to make sure we include all of America.
So that's where we're at. The world is reacting to some weaknesses that they see in the global free trade system. They're putting up barriers in the name of protection. And no one's really sure what that means. Like, it's kind of hard to not look at this and draw some parallels with the 1930s, when a series of economic crises led countries to put up trade barriers in the name of protection, which then led to ever greater economic strife, leading to unrest and eventually culminating in the Second World War. But don't read too far into that. I'm not trying to like do one of those things where I'm like, every 100 years, history repeats itself. That's not what I think is happening here. But there's some similarities that we should probably just keep an eye on. A suite of crises that make us turn inward, that surge populism and economic nationalism, and the rise of tensions between great powers. Hey, before you go, I need to tell you one last thing, which is that we...
Damn.